When we bow, bowing to the Buddha, to a teacher, someone we respect, or to each other, or even and especially to our innate goodness, when we recognize that within us. When we bow, there's so much there that could tell us about the heart, about the mind, about where the person is, whether that person is ourselves or someone else. But you can tell so much from a bow. Many people go through the motions, just like we do when we're talking, when we're doing something, when we're taking the 5 precepts, or the 8 precepts, or the 10 precepts. Many of us go through the motions, somehow expecting that by us having done this act, we've fulfilled the requirement for this. Whether it's a part of a usual ritual that we do, ceremony, or what we think this should lead us to. The same attitude we might have also towards our meditation, where that becomes enough for us. If I am to sit for an hour, for 2 or more, if I were to do walking meditation for a certain amount of time, then that fulfills it. Today's regimen, today's protocols have been fulfilled as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't. We must be with it, there, in it. And that requires humility. When you give it your all, as in when we're meditating or when we are bowing, you relinquish so much. You relinquish, you empty it all out. That's one of the reasons why when Lord Buddha gives us the 5 instances or 5 occasions where a person can become awakened, the first of which happens to be listening to the Dhamma. Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mahamoggallana, both attain to the first stage of awakening simply by listening. Not in a passive way, hearing but listening. Listening is like bowing, but what kind of a bow? What kind of a listening? Completely giving it up. Whatever it is that you were holding on to, whatever it is that we were thinking, this is who I am, this is what I believe myself to be. A stage, for example, that I think I must have reached. Or the kind of person I am, based on all the accolades I might have received, or what others have said about me. All that is just garbage. All that has nothing to do with the Dhamma. That's why we have to bow again and again every day. We are recommitting ourselves and readjusting ourselves to the Dhamma, not expecting the Dhamma to adjust to us. Today we live at a time period where human beings, we have become so full of ourselves. But interestingly enough, gotten so far away from looking at our innate goodness, where we have become performers. We're no longer human beings, we are human doings. You probably have heard me say that before. Human doing versus a human being. And what I mean by that is, we feel that we are not enough. We have to add something in order for us to be good, in order for us to be better, in order for us to be the best. That's a performance. To gain significance, to gain some shadow, some three-dimensionality to us, for us, by showing to the world that, hey, I am good because look at me, I just did this. Look at me, I am doing this. To the point where we have turned that onto us, onto ourselves, where in order for us to feel like, excuse me, we are okay, we have to prove to ourselves that we have deserved it. We have to prove to ourselves that I've done enough, I've performed enough to feel all right, to feel okay about myself, about the mind, about me being good. That performance mode also denotes, points out that the attention is always directed towards the outside. Meaning, my significance, whether I'm doing something right or not, or whether I do have innate goodness or not, has to come through you, the outsider, the external world. My partner, my wife, my husband, my friend, my boss, my anything, my community, the society, what others look at me as or see me as. And that's the perfect arena for being a performer. You're always on a stage trying to perform. That kills humility. That gets rid of anything authentic. Imagine an actor on stage performing, but being authentic. as oneself. No, they have to be authentic to the role they're playing, the character they're embodying. That is what we're trying to do. When Lord Buddha talks about asmi māna, the conceit, I am, this is who I am. In relation to whom? In relation to the other person, to you. Well, that is the surest way to make sure there cannot be any entryway for the Dhamma into the heart. Because we're too obsessed with the outside, with how I look. How do I come across? We're so much invested in being inauthentic. And that's why a genuine bow is so beautiful. Because you're just giving up everything. Your face is down, the forehead is touching the ground. Your palms are touching the ground. You're resting like a leaf that's dropped from a tree. Just like a leaf. And whatever comes, let it come. I am here. I am relinquishing. Now, this is not something we do only once a day or once in a lifetime. This is something we're doing all the time, so long as we are on the mind. We are completely fixated on the mind, looking at this filter called the mind. Whatever that may arise, we're there to observe it. This is the same thing. This is applying hiri and uttappa, that wise, moral shame, that wise, moral consideration or dread that Lord Buddha talks about, which are essential, absolutely 100% essential, crucial parts of awakening to take place, or even to understand the Dhamma. But hiri and uttappa in relation to someone else necessarily? No. Even though bringing to mind one's own teachers, the people, your own kalyana mittas in mind can help to deter you from doing a certain act. But as we're going deeper and deeper and deeper into the practice, where adisila manifests in the mind, where you've gone beyond the manifested keeping of the 5 precepts, mode of living, where every single action you commit to is a training in the precepts, because you're with the mind. You don't need to utter the 5 or 8 or 10 or 227 precepts. You're there with the mind. That is the same as a bow, because you're so present. You're not doing it for someone else. You're not doing it to perform for someone else. You're not doing it to show to someone else, hey, look at me. I am doing these steps. And that is one of the ways that we can slip out of today's convoluted society, disoriented society, and its messed up ways of thinking, where even the Dhamma we're trying to mess up, meaning adjusting the Dhamma to our own likes and dislikes, or what society deems to be acceptable. there's no humility there. And this path requires humility. And another thing, when we are bowing, we're not bowing per se to someone else, be it the teacher, be it the statue of a Buddha or whatever. Ultimately, we are bowing to the reality of the moment, seeing the mind for what it is, giving up. Patinisagga. Remember the Anapanasati Sutta? The very last of the 16th step, that the four tetrads, the very last, the 16th step. What was it? One breathes it, breathes in, one breathes out, contemplating, giving up, being with that sense of giving up, seeing, witnessing, observing that process of giving up, starting with just observing the breath. Even when you're breathing in, you already know that it's temporary. You're not going to be holding on to the breath. You can't. So already the meditator is aware that at the entrance point, yes, you're coming in, but I know that I will give you up. As it's about to come out, oh yes, I know that even the exhalation, I'm going to give up because there's another one that's going to be coming in. The same with our thoughts, the same with our ideas about the Dhamma, about our status in the practice, about any jhanas or attainments that we might have come to or have been told that we have reached or something like that. All of which needs to be relinquished at every single millisecond. Every single millisecond. And that is the only way that we can prepare the mind in order for the mind to actually get to a point where sati and sampajanya are working in unison. This is what we also talk about as mahasati and mahapanya. Nibbana is not going to fall into our laps by accident. It's impossible. There is no such a thing as a sudden awakening. There's no such thing at all. However, if the person is dedicated continuously, imagine being in a four-walled room where no light is coming in. Sati and Panya are like the chisel and the hammer that the assiduous, the dedicated practitioner will start to put holes into the walls, crack every single tiny little centimeter square to get the brilliant light of awakening come in, until there are no more walls and the ceiling and the ground, everything is poof, gone. That is awareness. It's not going to just come because, hey, we just have a good kamma or something like that. Those are helpful, but they're not it. And there is no secret code. There is no secret teaching. There isn't arranging the teaching in such a way, finding that nice little crack. It's almost like getting it perfectly lined up within the crosshairs and boom, yes, I figured it out. The puzzle is solved. It's not like that either. It requires continuous hammering with sati. Hammering what? Every moment of ignorance, and most of our moments are filled with ignorance. When you are by yourself, when you are leaning down to pick up your slippers, or you're going to the grocery store, or you're getting into your car or into the bus, or sitting on your bathroom chair, anything, you are looking at each of those seemingly insignificant moments as if they are each a treasure chest full of incredible treasures. Unfortunately, our hands are full, though. We can't get anything from the treasure chest. They are full with what we think we have gathered, we have amassed from the previous moments, or from the last time we had this interesting insight, for example, or some experience we think we must have had, or somebody else have told us that we have experienced. What has been happening since then? Most of us are still singing the chants dedicated to that particular incident, whether it's an insight, whether even if it wasn't a genuine experience of something supramundane. Our hands are full with what we think, what is Dhamma, what is adhamma. Our arms, our every single, our bowls are full of nonsense. And anything that is not in the present, anything that is not being exposed to the authenticity of the present, to life, is inauthentic. That is also asmi, māna. That is the person living with the sense of identification, what Lord Buddha talked about as atta. And that's why he gave it anatta, the term non-substantiality of a self. That's why he unraveled this thing called a human experience, a living experience, into the paticca-samuppada, the 12 links of causal relations, so that we see what is happening to us, with us, in us. The moment we are bowing to the present moment, that moment is a beautiful moment because we are fully present to Sati. We are fully present in seeing the mind the way it is, in seeing the body, and anything that is being triggered by the body or the 6 sense doors to agitate the mind, we are there to see it. But we won't be able to see it at all unless we have relinquished, given up what we think should be happening now, which is the kiss of death, as they would say in Hollywood or in fairy tale books. It's just the opposite of what we want to happen when we're meditating. That's why we have to return back to the object of meditation, whatever it may be. We have to return constantly, constantly, constantly. Return from what? Returning from what we think should be happening. And that is why we need teachers. The teacher is the one who will point the finger and say, nope, nope, nope. The teacher is not trying to take away anything from you. that is genuine, that is authentic. The teacher is simply pulling the rug, the chair from under whatever is inauthentic. But we're so attached to our views. And that's why our views are at the core of the problem. Remember, the Noble Eightfold Path, what is the first step? Right view. In contrast to what? Wrong view. There's no way that we can actually progress on this path if the very first step is crooked, is wrong, is miccāditthi or ditti, which is wrong view. So we must make sure that the very first step is correct, right view. Sammaditthi, Lord Buddha says. Because if we have sammaditthi, then every single one of the follow-up steps will have a chance of success. Because it will be based on solid foundation. And every time we're bowing, we are actually establishing a solid foundation for ourselves, for our day. Every time you bring in a little bit of sati, just sati, without any signatures from any incidents, any mental memory associations from what it felt like when you were experiencing sati, or you, none of that. Just the moment the way it is happening, just a drop, a crystal drop of sati into that moment to see what's going on. It's like putting that hole into the dark, dark, pitch black room, putting a hole into that wall and looking, and all of a sudden, you don't even have to look because the brilliant light ray is going to shine through like a laser beam. But you cannot hold on to that ray, that laser beam, can you? That's not your objective. To hold on to sati, to grab hold of panya, to grab hold of an insight. That's not it. But it requires for us not to have any pockets to put stuff in. A funny thing happens every time I travel and go through security at the airports, where, you know, you go through the routines and you stand like this, and they zap you with different kinds of, you know, waves, electromagnetic waves, to see if you are carrying anything, you know, forbidden or whatever that you're not supposed to. And because the robes of a bhikkhu are in a certain way, people will, every single time around the world, the individual in charge would come and very respectfully ask if they could go through my robes. And what do I have? That's the next question is, what do I have in my pockets? Every single time I'm asked this question, and I giggle a little bit, and I say, I'm a bhikkhu, I'm a Buddhist monk. We're not supposed to have any pockets. I'm just wearing robes. But because they are layers upon layers of robes, and you have also this, what looks like a belt, hand-woven usually, that's holding everything together. It looks like you're carrying, I don't know, like something like, you know, a bag or a few pockets. And then anyhow, they have to do their work, and I say, but please go ahead and do your job, you know, and they go through and they see that there's no pockets. But that's just on the superficial level, on the surface. We might be completely naked, but we might have nothing but pockets, carrying stuff with us. I once was, years ago, I came across this book about Indian yogis or sadhus, something like that. And I was amazed at, these are the people who just go around and usually naked in India. To this day, you see them. Many of them have given up, let's say, the lay life, but they carry a lot of stuff with them. But actually a few particular pictures, photographs in the book really caught my attention. And I read about each of these so-called sadhus, and I saw that each of these were individuals were or had a life in the military or very prestigious positions within the government or officials within in India, they really respect the train systems and all that. So anybody who is within that world has a very respectful position within society. So they are given a lot of accolades and awards and medals. So each of these photographs I'm referring to had the sadhus being completely naked, with dreadlock hairs and all that, carrying their trident staff, and somehow managed to glue on their chests these medals. Naked, but with medals. Whether the person is a bhikkhu or not, whether we have pockets or not, we are carrying stuff with us. Whether it's titles, whether it's about attainments, whether it's about this or that. Oh, I am the CEO of such and such a company. I make this much money every year. I have this many employees. It really doesn't matter whether we're talking about a layperson or a monastic or somebody supposedly living the holy life, the spiritual life. Excuse me. These are all superficial stuff. These can fool us. Remember the thing I was mentioning about performing? These are just aspects of performance. Ultimately, they really don't matter. What matters is how authentically am I bowing down to this moment? How authentically am I observing this experience without adding anything to it from my previous moments, filtering it with different lenses of experiences I might have had. Therefore, I'm anticipating this moment to be such and such. But that is stealing the significance of whatever this moment might be trying to tell me. So it is crucial for us to constantly bring back sati in that sense, leaving everything behind, every single moment. The breath is the perfect example for this, isn't it? Every time we're breathing in, it's a new life. But that life is ending at the end of that inhale already. Without trying, or losing ourselves in some philosophical, some type of a interpretation of all this, just bring yourself back to the question. Am I able to stay with the breath from beginning, middle, and end? How about the exhale? Am I able to be with the breath at the moment that I start exhaling, the midpoint, and its end? Am I able Every time I'm sending metta to my spiritual friend, am I able to actually see or feel in my heart? Am I able to feel metta, first of all? And am I able to follow through? Feel that vibrating, radiating metta continue, or does it have gaps in it? Am I losing awareness? Am I losing sati in mid, quote unquote, sentence, as it were? Now, this means you are putting a lot more holes in the pitch black room, in those walls. Dark, black walls are now having more and more holes in them. And the light is now coming through those cracks you have placed. That is what's going to make Nibbana happen. Not how many retreats you go to, not how many suttas you learn. It takes work. It takes work. It takes effort. That's why I say it's not going to fall into your laps. That's never going to happen. Even the best examples where a person was able to attain in a very quick manner, Bahya Daruchirya being the perfect example of that. He, just in that life, ran for days, nonstop, except for just a few hours of rest. Ran to go to see the Lord Buddha. Even after he got to Lord Buddha, he bowed down, he asked him again and again, 3 times. Meanwhile, his mind was calming down, and Lord Buddha was giving him that time to settle. Now, if you remember, Bahya was also one of those 7 bhikkhus who had gone up onto the top of the rock. Remember? Kassapa Buddha's time. And he was one of those 5 who died actually when they pushed away the ladder and they said, we're not going to leave here until we have done and given our very best. We're not going to eat, we're not going to drink, we're going to just keep on meditating. That level of dedication was still with him in his last birth, when he finally got to see Lord Buddha in Savatthi, and he was fully ready. He was so sharp, he was laser sharp. He was so in the present moment. That's what it really means here and now, not something that we've been regurgitating and vomiting and regurgitating it again. This thing called here and now, be here, be now, all that. No. These are not just bumper stickers. So we cannot trivialize the moment with what we think it should be. Don't trivialize the authenticity of the Dhamma. And every single moment that is lived with Sati is pure Dhamma. Now, can we greet it? Can we bow down to it? That is adjusting ourselves to the Dhamma. Not expecting the Dhamma to adjust to us, which is another form of performance, because we are faking it. And we have plenty of that all around. With lofty titles, lofty, things, and, superficial things. There's so much corruption in the world. But the most important corruption is the one we carry in our hearts. And that is the only one we have control over, to expel. And you have a chance to do that every time you are bringing awareness to your meditation object, whether it's the breath, whether it's the body, or just looking at the mind. Don't let it go through the motions. That is living inauthentically. And that is the way where your meditation does not stay with just the sitting meditation, period. Wherever you go, it's with you. You might even forget your name if someone were to ask you, but if you're living like that, you might forget your name, but Sati will not be forgotten. And that's another term for Sati, remembering. Even if you forget, Sati will be with you. Even in your dream, in your sleep, it will stay with you. The Dhamma is wonderful that Lord Buddha taught. It's incomparable. It's so rich. And it keeps on giving. That's why there cannot be a moment of boredom. And that's a thing, a phenomenon that all of us meditators go through, of course, being bored. But if the mind is truly, truly on the object, as it is taking place, if the mind is full of sati, you will see there cannot be a repeat of anything, of any experience. Every experience is genuinely, purely new. It's fresh. It is me carrying over asmi, māna, I am, that conceit, carrying over from the previous moment, that is convincing me that this moment is exactly like the moment that passed. Complete rubbish. Complete avidya. Has nothing to do with life. So the moment we become mindful in that sense, in every single moment, to ourselves, and whatever's going on with the mind, you're never living a dull, boring moment. And when a person lives a life like that, there goes the need for pono bhavika, the desire to re-become, the desire to be reborn. It's gone, poof, vaporized. That's why the arahants, the noble savakas, every moment they looked at something, they're so there. I remember years ago when I saw a picture of, just to pick one, Shwe Min Sayadaw. I thought he was blind. I thought he was blind. Very skinny Bhikkhu. So regal, so collected, so beautiful. An old, old monk. Standing with his students. And then later on, I found out that he's not blind because his eyes are always gazing down whenever the pictures were taken, the photographs were taken. And then you look at Webu Sayadaw, his eyes are looking down until you capture one of those rare video clips, recordings of them giving a Dhamma talk, and you see how they are fully engaged. Their eyes are so there, like a child. Every moment, they're fully there. You look at Ajahn Mun's, any of his pictures, his photographs, which we're so fortunate to still have. It's like the eyes are going to penetrate through your screen and come straight at your heart. They're coming at your heart if you're able to see it, to feel it. It's so sharp, laser sharp. There's not an iota of inauthenticity there. Despite the ages or the decades that have passed on from the moments that these photographs, black and white, most of them, have been taken. Again, these are there simply, I'm mentioning them simply to inspire us that others have done it. Others have done it and are doing it. But they're not showing off. They're not carrying those medals, you know, that they have glued or, I don't know, sutured, stitched into their skin or something while they're running around naked. None of that nonsense. Can you bow fully? Fully. Just like a raindrop, relinquishing itself into the soil. Giving up, relinquishing. Can you do that every time you bow? Can you really be seeing what is happening around you? What your eyes are bringing in to you? And what that might be triggering in your mind to have a position towards? What you're hearing. Is there an immediate response or reaction in your heart against that or in reference to that thing you just heard? How can there be a moment that's boring then? Because your sixth sense doors are always bringing in new information. If you're there to witness them, to see them, to be mindful of them, and seeing how they arise, how they're there. They arise for a brief moment, and then they just vanish. In the Book of the Fours, in the Anguttara Nikaya, Numerical Discourses, Lord Buddha describes beautifully, as he always does, the Supreme Teacher, how the way that a person becomes an arahant is when they start looking at nama rupa, or form. They see form. They see its arising briefly, and they see it vanish. This is the practitioner. The practitioner sees also Vedana, feeling, whether it's positive, pleasant, enjoyable, pleasurable, whether it's painful, and whether it is neutral. And the person sees the Vedana, the feeling, the way it is, and you're so curiously sniffing it out. You're, what's happening? Where is it? Oh, I see it. Okay, it's arising. I see it there. Brief. Oh, it's gone. You didn't miss that one either. Then you go to sanya, memories, thoughts, mental associations, perceptions. And you're able to see them. You're able to see them linger briefly, depending on how much attention the mind is giving also. Like a memory all of a sudden can become a huge novel for you. A series of episodes of movies, in fact. Why? Because the attention is stuck on that. It is ayoniso manasikara, unwise reflection, unwise attention. But the person who is nearing arahantship already is privy to that. is able to see that those mechanisms if they occur. And immediately, that's one of the reasons why Lord Buddha is stating this. When you're seeing the 5 aggregates, we mentioned Namarupa, Vedana, Sanya. Now we're on Sanya. So if the mind is able to stay with it, you will be able to see, oh, okay, you're just a memory. I see. So instead of allowing it to carry over and last a long time, you see memory just as memory, and then it lasts much less time. And then you see it disappearing. And then you go to sankharas, habitual tendencies. You see how much you invest emotionality into something based on the memory that you saw. And that is what's keeping the attention reinvested in it. Reinvested. But because the mindful meditator is aware of this, they see sankharas when they arise, and they say, I'm not going to give you extra attention. I'm just observing. I'm just observing, like a mirror. And it just vanishes. And then the same goes with sense awareness or vijnana. Same thing happens there. You see it. Oh, yes. I touched that warm object. I'm feeling that heat or burn. Okay. And it's vanishing. That moment is vanishing. But this is happening so fast. So fast. Where we think that this is a long, big opera. Big procession of consciousness is taking place meanwhile. Continuous. But we are the ones who are attaching the sense of identity to this whole drama, the magic show, as Bhante would say, and making it into a story. So don't believe the story of your life. Don't believe the stories that keep on being regurgitated in the mind. And how do we do that? Bring your awareness to what's happening right in front of you. But please bring in fresh eyes. Fresh eyes with humility. Bow to it. I don't know. That's another way of describing humility. I don't have all the answers. I don't know, but I can be aware of me not knowing. But I know this is authentic, and I just have to give myself to it with full awareness. That takes courage. In fact, there is nothing more courageous than that in life. Nothing more courageous, because this path will take you to Nibbana. No ifs and buts about this. Lord Buddha gave us the guarantee. The Arya Savakas, to this day, guarantee that if we do these steps correctly, if I'm able to relinquish, if I'm able to empty my bowl from yesterday's stuff, and just be fully present to what's happening in front of me, fully, authentically, not in a performance mode, mind you, but just to be there, irrespective of the world around us. By the way, we cannot be performers if we're stuck on an island, for example, on a deserted island, and there's just you. Who are you going to perform to then? Nobody there to watch you. Nobody for you to later on go and report to. Just you. And that is where mindfulness really can send down its roots and become strong in us. So that moment of bowing is also a moment of solitary awareness, anchoring yourself in authenticity. upon authenticity. And we cannot know the Dhamma, we cannot listen even to the Dhamma, we cannot practice definitely the Dhamma if we are living inauthentic lives. No amount of taking precepts again and again and again and again, no amount of chanting suttas or doing suttas, reading suttas, researching suttas, writing, doing commentaries on the suttas is ever going to get you even a tiny little bit closer to the Dhamma if the mind is corrupted. So every time we are starting with a bow, we're starting from right view. And a bow itself has so much saddha in it. It has so much faith and so much confidence in it. You're in the presence of Lord Buddha. What more to ask? So I'll pause here and ask if there's any questions and comments pertaining to the practice and to the Dhamma, of course.
Bhante, thank you for your talk.
Mm.
You were just momentarily ago talking about us seeing form arising and passing away, and then seeing memories arise and pass away. And I can see the mental aggregates arising and passing away much more easily. A memory comes and it passes away, and a feeling comes and it passes away.
Mm.
But I'm struggling to see forms arising and passing away. I mean, some forms are going to be here long after I am, and we can't even see any change, let alone passing away and changes. So I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit for me. What is it I'm seeing when I'm looking for forms passing away, separate from the mental aspects that I can see, the perception of them, the consciousness of them? The forms themselves actually arise and pass away? How do I observe that?
Do you breathe from your chest or from your belly normally?
Normally chest.
Chest. Can I ask you to gently place your hand on your chest? Bring your attention to your tactile perception, your fingertips and your hand as you're breathing in and as you're breathing out. Do you notice that movement?
Yes.
When we talk about rupa or form, it's not necessarily just some solid object. It has solidity in it, but it also has fluidity in it, liquid, basically, liquid nature. It has also fire in it, heat. It has also motion or pressure, which stands for air. Those are basically the primary four elements I just listed. All of them are captured within the term we use as rupa. But it doesn't stop there. That tiny little experiment we did with you placing your hand, that has been traditionally what is the quickest way that a person can launch into or quickly observe form in its aspect of anicca, the movement between phases. Now, the mind is not so quick, usually, to pick up all the different derivations, all the different phases. Let's say even the phases of the four primary elements, because we're having all of them happen all the time. It's not just one being the only dominant. they change positions. But the breath itself, whether you go to Mahasi tradition, where the attention is on the belly, rising and falling, rising and falling. So he would be using the four elements in conjunction with the movement, the motion of the body in that sense. If you go somewhere else, let's say another tradition, let's say the focus would be around the nostrils as the air is coming in and out. In either case, we are observing, witnessing movement in the form of the phases going through changes. Anicca. Now, of course, some people actually have a difficulty with what you said comes to you rather easily, meaning looking at memory, excuse me, memory or thoughts. They have a hard time seeing even the last portion of the memory when it's about to disappear. Because just like in the case of breath, so is with the nama aspects. Nama aspects are, as I pointed out earlier, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, and Vijnana of the five aggregates. So those are not so tangible for many people until they actually put some practice and effort into it. But the goal is, whether it's the form, the breath, or any of the nama elements, for us to see not just their tail end as they're about to disappear, but especially the beginning. That is the key, because most people, if they put some effort, rather quickly they are able to find the tail end of the breath, especially when they're doing the counting, let's say 10 counts, etc. But we usually capture the end of the breath, meaning the exhalation. But we're not there usually to pick it up, to see it at the moment of beginning of the inhale. So what these two points are, anchor points, are the beginning and the end of what we were referring to earlier about Lord Buddha's mention of observing the five aggregates as they're there. This comes the second one. The middle portion is the next critical point for the mind to be able to capture, to see, to observe, not to miss out on. And that is those few milliseconds, no matter how long they last, and then the last portion. And then to make it such a habit where you're able to see, you don't have to see all five. You just have to pick the one that is the most obvious to you. So the breath, I usually will give you that because it's obviously, as you pointed out also, it's not easy to see the the brain doesn't function like that, like a videotape that you can slow it down or see the transitional stages as they occur of, let's say, a mountain, or like that volcano that erupted in South Pacific, for example, or Mount St. Helens when it erupted. So you can play it on a tape so you could see all the changes that happened, the before, during, and after. We don't have that luxury when we're looking at objects that often. But the nama portions can really help us to see it, which is what you're obviously doing, even when you're placing your hand on your chest to observe the breath go in and out. And that is another point to be added to this is, if you recall in the first tetrad of the Anapanasati, and also in the Mahavedalla Sutta, where Venerable Sariputta was talking to Venerable Mahakottita, I believe, about the kaya sankharas, or physical formations, or bodily formations, or I like to call sankharas habitual tendencies. They mean a lot more to me. They're more fleshy for me. I can relate to them better. Either way, the sankharas, the bodily kaya sankharas, Lord Buddha always describes it, as do the Arya Savakas, the Arahants, as the breath. The breath's movement within the body. Because that is where it is so loud, just like you discovered. You're noticing how the breath is, the chest is filling up. And you're observing it, how it is receding, compressing and pushing out the air. Now, if even visually you can pay attention to it. Let's say especially when you're laying down, like supine position on the ground, and I would do this usually with belly breathing, let's say, but it doesn't matter. It's the same thing with the chest. So exhale all the air out and just gently place the hand on it. This is to familiarize you more with the motions. As you're exhaling all the air out, so there's no air left in the lungs, put a marker there in your mind, a mental marker, an anchor point, if you will, and say, that is the beginning. As you're noticing now the hand rise, your chest is becoming more inflated. The lungs are being fuller and fuller with air. And once it reaches that high point, the climax, put another anchor point, a marker there. That's the midpoint. And when the time is right, this is happening on its own, by the way. You're not forcing. This is not pranayama. There is no controlling of the breath. You're just allowing it to happen. And then you notice how the hand slowly, on its own, comes down with gravity, because now the lungs are expelling the air out. As you're doing this what seems to be so mundane type of a activity, suddenly you start to see through. And the 5 aggregates no longer are something that you read about, write about, explore, etc., out there, charts. No, they are now fully becoming tangible, palatable for you. This is how we can also see Dhamma becoming alive for the practitioner. You can carry this with you wherever you go. That's essentially what Lord Buddha is saying in the Book of the Fours, where he's saying about the 5 aggregates. You see the aggregate, however, whatever it is, because the mind is going to have a leaning towards, at that moment, towards one of the aggregates. So one of them is going to be outshining the others at that specific moment. And we don't have control over that. So it could be your awareness, excuse me, suddenly picking up sense awareness, vijnana. Or you can just quickly pick up, oh, I'm dwelling on a thought which is actually a memory. So that becomes the most obvious. Or you're about to lift something, and suddenly you become cognizant of your body, or you're squatting down. Bhante Nyanananda would use the example of a weightlifter to magnify or intensify the image that I was sharing with you of a simple breath. Because obviously, when you are lifting heavy weight, unnatural weight, you have to really muster up the courage, but you have to really intentionally breathe in even more to allow the muscles to, it's aerobic reaction. So basically you have to add more oxygen into the muscle mass. So you can't push that thing up. So he uses that to accentuate the rupa aspect, to really make it stand out for the person. That's what you mean. Because you cannot continuously be in a position where you have lifted it. You have to come down. You have to bring down the weight. Anicca. That is you coming down the hill, just like your hand was coming down. How is this working?
So that makes it very clear for living beings, animate objects. And so that's great. Thank you. But I'm wondering, should I only be considering animate objects, or should I be able to see arising and passing away in a rock, for example?
Obviously, it will take a little bit longer time, but as far as inanimate objects, a dead leaf, for example, even though it's dead, it's down there on the ground, on the forest floor, but it's not the only one in that state, meaning chlorophyll has been emptied out, but there is probably carotenoids and things like that. Sorry, I'm going into biology, but chlorophyll is the green color, green pigment that you have within the chloroplast, within the cell of a plant. And once the leaf leaves, is no longer attached to the life-giving tree, it no longer has, so basically chlorophyll runs out. But what is behind the scenes happening is the other color, which is the carotenoids, or the carrot colors, orange colors. When we see the changes of the fall season, autumn, what is that? That's chlorophyll emptying out in the leaves, and then you have a little bit more carotenoid, and then you have absolutely 100% carotenoid, and then it's just dead. That's also emptied out. Now you have a brown piece of leaf, dead. So you don't have to necessarily see the leaves go through those transitions, the single leaf, that is. But if the awareness comes into view, we bring it into the scene, as it were, and we're looking at the different branches, or the different, rather, leaves. The whole scene is playing out in front of my eyes. I'm seeing all the phases of the leaf, which, for all intents and purposes, is inanimate now. Now, similarly with a rock, you look at a rock that is way up on the hilltop or on the mountain, and you're going to notice it very jagged or sharp at the edges, very definitive shape to it. But as the rocks get pushed down through the glaciers and whatnot, or just, avalanches, and they land into the rivulets and then the rivers, eventually, as they get to the ocean, you look at rocks that have none of those angles to them. Instead, they're very smooth, they're very round, they're oval shaped or round shaped. You see this a lot on riverbanks. That's another way of looking into inanimate objects, or a rock that's been placed there, and it's not moving, it's huge, let's say. And then you see lichen on it, or tiny little algae growing, which break up the rock into pieces. I know that in Japan, they used to have a tradition, which I would like to think that they still continue doing it. And it's a multi-generational tradition. Rocks mean, it's part of the Shinto religion in Japan, and they have a significance. They have energies to them based on Shintoism. So what they do is, let's say the grandfather of the family goes with the grandchild into the woods, into nature, and they grab hold of a rock that's somewhat massive but manageable to be carried, and they carry it to the ocean or to a mouth of a river, let's say, but usually around the ocean, where there's constant banging with the waves, crashing of the waves. And they place the rock, and they probably put a marker around that rock, maybe a letter denoting the family name or last name, and they leave it there for decades. Now, the grandchild, who's now a grandfather, decades, comes back and picks up that rock, which now has so much of a different character to it. The waves have chiseled out its surfaces. There's roundedness. There's probably even holes there. And they carry that rock and they bring it into their garden, or they place it in a very important, significant position within the house, within the front yard perhaps, or in their meditation garden. And that rock now is part of the family history, plus it has been touched by nature. Human beings have put their hand in there, of course. And there is time playing there. So they know when they look at that rock that that's not how it was when our grandfather picked it up. Time has touched it. Anicca has touched it. So I hope I didn't go too far of a tangent but I found that story very moving years ago when I was in Zen archery, Kyudo. It was wonderful when I heard the sensei describe that to me. So I hope that helps.
It's a great story, but the help to us to see arising and passing in form is to know about all the changes over time rather than to actually see it happen.
Yes.
In the next 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, the best example again is what you did first, the breath.
Yes.
I don't know of any better example to demonstrate that because our three-dimensional world, actually 4 dimensions with time in there, we don't have the luxury to see the body, let's say, go through those changes. Of course, memory will help you, like looking at your hands. I have liver spots on my hands. I know that was not there about 20 years ago or 10 years ago, or the hand or the wrinkles. So we are seeing it, but we are not fast enough to capture the changes that are happening. So for that, we need to utilize Dhamma Vichaya, the investigation of states, which is always using whatever is at its disposal. Dhamma Vichaya use everything because it's based on wisdom. Wisdom is not going to ask permission to tap into, no, I can only investigate sankharas. No, that's never going to happen. Wisdom will use every single thing because everything is Dhamma for it. It will look at the breath, it will look at the body, it will look at the leaves. In fact, to the point where you will not be able to miss out any Dhamma. Everywhere you look, you're going to see Paticcasamuppada. Everywhere you look, you're like, what is my involvement to this? What is in this? What is my connection to this? Why is my heart palpitating a little bit more intensely when I look at this picture versus that? All of this is Dhamma Vichaya's work. And even looking at the leaves, you're seeing, oh, anicca. And you look at the tree branches, now they're just like twigs. When a few months ago they were bearing fruit, you see, and then you look down, you see something else, and then not even look at the tree branches or the leaves, and you look at your heart, and there is a preference there probably. Oh, I'd rather see these leaves on the tree branches plus some fruits on there that I can taste. I don't know. All this is not being missed out on. So in that sense, the Dhamma becomes alive. So it's no longer something you do or you study outside of your life, separate from, and never the twain shall meet type of a situation. No, it's your life. Dhamma is your life, in fact, not becomes.
Yeah.
Very good question, as always. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Bhante, thanks very much for the very inspiring talk and the comments that follows. If I were to understand the Dhamma correctly, accurately, Rupa is not the four great elements per se. And our perception, likewise, our perception of Rupa is not the real Rupa. To qualify that, I would say that most of the time our perception of Rupa, for example, perception of a rock or a leaf or even ourselves, is such that there is inherent permanency in what we see as a rock, as ourselves. And that is where the avijja lies. And that's where we need to get rid of. Is that accurate?
What you're describing is the development of Buddhism and Buddhist thought in using your own interpretation, the way you understand the Rupa portion of Nama Rupa. There's a lot of Abhidhamma there in how you described it, which was a later development. However, there are also elements that are valid in what you said. In the context of where this is going, where this is taking us. However, when we look at Rupa, the way it is described in the Nikayas, you always, always, always see it being referenced to the four great elements, but they're not only it. However, we have to have something concrete because ultimately you do have a body. So Lord Buddha was not going to just talk about the elements or what we think or what we perceive about the elements. That's why I was mentioning fluidity or pressure or motion. Motion also has to denote something that is in movement, a form, a matter, something that we can measure, quantify, observe, in some way, basically have a relationship to it. It's not mental only. For that, Lord Buddha talked about Nama. Otherwise, he would have just said Nama, and that's the end of it. But he said Nama and Rupa, but he didn't stop there. So the attention within the Nikayas for the listeners, as far as Rupa is concerned, there's always, always, always a reference to the body. The body. Now, Lord Buddha, of course, breaks it down to the four great elements vis-a-vis loka or the world. However, you don't have to go so far because that's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of the Abhidhammas, because they can detach us. It becomes so heady, it becomes too philosophical, it becomes too disengaged from, for example, the Asubha practices. You have to see a worm-infested body to become repulsed, really disgusted by the body. You have to see a body that is livid, it's turning black and blue, a body that smells. That can shake you much more than sitting down and saying, well, Rupa is actually our perception about what we think is a solid, etc., etc. No. Each of them has its own place. We shouldn't throw it out by saying, well, Rupa is not about elements. That's not appropriate to say, because we have to have a relationship to the body. And this is how the Dhamma, after 500 years, began to actually disintegrate. When you had the Mahayana elements come in and it became too philosophical. And the relationship between how this body can help us to attain Nibbana became less and less and less, and it became less important to consider the body. Because even if you don't recall any suttas, any verses from the Dhammapada, but you are cognizant to see the body as it is going through its changes. Like Chulapantaka, the younger brother of two brothers, who was supposedly dumb, considered to be the dumbest person in the Sangha. Everybody was ignoring him, including his own brother. And Lord Buddha gave him a piece of white cloth and said, just rub it. And after doing that for a while, that white piece of cloth became dirty. All that is rupa. Now, it's not just rupa, because we see dirty cloths all the time. Of course, the perception has to be there. Of course, but we have to keep each of those places intact and to understand the relationships. That's how Chulapantaka, suddenly, the so-called dumb bhikkhu, suddenly became an arahant. Because he saw the changes. He remembered for the first time, because he had a hard time remembering even the shortest verses that Lord Buddha gave him intentionally, just a very, very short verse to remember. And he, excuse me, he wasn't able to remember that. So he needed something tactile, something that he could touch, a form he could touch and have a relationship with. And this is one of the reasons why too much talking about Dhamma is not a good thing. Continuously. We have to take it and go on, go off, and just see how we are relating with the Dhamma in our bodies. For example, trauma cannot be just held in the brain, in the mind. Your body keeps that information. I very much emphasize the role of the body in the way I teach. Something that, especially thanks to modern commentators even, they've cut that connection, which is deplorable, which actually does a great damage. Too much headiness. That's why Abhidhamma and other people who promote such ideas, they don't get the student to advance fast enough, because they are relinquishing the importance of the body. So there was a reason why Lord Buddha mentioned the 4 elements in the Nikayas countless times. But yes, it's not just those 4, but that is the core of it. At the basis of it, we need to have an understanding of it. When the earth element is being talked about, it's not just the actual earth, of course. There is the understanding of solidity. Solidity in what? It could be the solidity in a person's position towards what we were talking about earlier about the Dhamma. This is how the Dhamma is supposed to be. That is very solid. So you now have the element of earth in that context. It's not the actual earth we're talking about. It is the solid, rigid position of the person. So in that sense, yes, our interpretations of these 4 great elements might also be representatives of rupa. In that sense, yes. So I hope that is helpful or addresses your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Any other thoughts and questions? Okay, so let us share some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Next Saturday, we will be resuming, excuse me, the Sutta exploration series, and the sutta that we'll be covering is Girimananda Sutta, and I just finished translating it, and Dhammadina will be sending each of you a copy of it, and also the recording I finished yesterday. So I'm excited to cover that with you. It helps to go over it. That's why I like to send you a copy of it, to kind of prepare the mind, and perhaps maybe even if it might help to bring up a question or two, perhaps to clarify, so we can discuss that. So I look forward to seeing you again next week. Continue your practice and bow down beautifully. Whoever it is you bow down to. So may the triple gem bless you all and your loved ones.